after a long month of work, seeing that your paycheck hit, and then watching it slowly evaporate. There is the rent or the mortgage, the car payment, the grocery bill that seems to get higher every single time you walk through those sliding glass doors. Money feels like a bucket with a few holes in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in from the top, you are constantly racing against the leaks. There is a specific threshold where the math of your life fundamentally shifts. It is the point where you are no longer the only one working for your future. It is the moment you hit $1 million invested. Now, I know that number sounds like a mountain peak hidden behind the clouds for a lot of people, but the reason we need to talk about it today isn't just to stare at a big number. It is because understanding why things change at that level will actually help you navigate the path you are on right now, whether you have $10 or $10,000 to your name. By the end of our conversation, you are going to see exactly why the first 100,000 is a nightmare, and why that $1 million mark is the literal escape velocity for your freedom. Hey, I'm Dylan from Dylan Investments. Money talks, and I translate it for you. To really get why $1 million is the magic number, we have to start with the physics of money. Think about a giant boulder sitting at the top of a hill. To get that boulder moving, you have to put your shoulder into it. You are sweating, your legs are shaking, and for the first few inches, it feels like you aren't getting anywhere at all. This is the stage most people are in. This is the $0 to $100,000 stage. In this phase, your effort is everything. If you save an extra $100 a month, your net worth goes up by exactly $100. The market doesn't really help you yet because 7% of almost nothing is still basically nothing. This is the part where most people quit because the feedback loop is broken. You sacrifice the latte, you skip the vacation, you drive the older car, and at the end of the year, your account has grown by a few $1,000s. It doesn't feel like wealth. It feels like chores. But something weird starts to happen as that boulder starts to roll. Once you hit that first 100,000, the gravity of compounding starts to take over. By the time you get to $1 million, the boulder isn't just moving. It is a force of nature. At that point, the roles reverse. You aren't pushing the boulder anymore. You are just standing back and making sure it stays on the right path. Let's look at it this way. If you have $1 million invested in a basic, boring index fund that tracks the broader stock market, and that market has a pretty standard year where it goes up by 7%, your account grew by $70,000. Think about that for a second. You made $70,000 just by waking up and existing. For the average American, that is more than a full year's salary. It is the point where your money has officially become a full-time employee that never sleeps, never takes a sick day, and never asks for a raise. This is where the everything changes part kicks in. When your money earns more than you do, your relationship with work, risk, and time undergoes a total transformation. Suddenly, the boss who stresses you out or the commute that drains your soul isn't a life sentence anymore. It becomes a choice. And that choice is the most valuable thing you can ever buy. I know a guy, let's call him Alex. Alex was a project manager at a construction firm. He was a disciplined guy, lived in a modest apartment, and drove a truck that was 10 years old. For 15 years, he stayed the course. He told me that for the first 10 years, he felt like he was just throwing money into a black hole. He hit 50,000, then 100, then 200. He was doing okay, but he still felt the pressure of the monthly bills. He still felt like one bad accident or one layoff could ruin him. But then, he crossed that 7-figure line. I talked to him a few months after it happened, and the change in his voice was incredible. He hadn't bought a Ferrari. He hadn't moved into a mansion. But he told me that for the first time in his adult life, he felt like he could breathe. He realized that if he got fired tomorrow, it wouldn't be a tragedy. It would be an early retirement. That shift in mindset changed how he showed up at work. He was less stressed, more confident, and ironically, he ended up getting a promotion because he wasn't acting out of fear anymore. That is the psychological dividend of the $1 million mark. Here is where this gets interesting, and it is a part most people never see because they are too focused on the struggle of the day-to-day. When you hit $1 million, the world actually starts to get cheaper for you. It sounds unfair, and in a way it is. But this is one of those hidden systems that governs how our economy works. When you have $1 million in an investment account, banks look at you differently. If you need a loan, you aren't begging for it. They are competing for your business. You can access something called a securities-based line of credit. Essentially, you can borrow money against your investments at incredibly low interest rates without ever having to sell your stocks. This means if Alex wanted to buy a new house, he wouldn't necessarily have to sell his portfolio and pay a huge tax bill. He could just borrow against it, keep his $1 million invested and growing, and use the bank's money to fund his life at a rate much lower than what a typical person would pay for a credit card or a personal loan. The system is designed to keep money in the hands of people who already have it, and once you cross that $1 million threshold, you are officially inside the club. Now let's go one level deeper into the math of why the journey from 0 to $1 million is so lopsided. This is the part that usually blows people's minds. Let's say it takes you 20 years of hard work and disciplined saving to hit that first $1 million. You might think it will take another 20 years to hit the second $1 million. But because of the way compounding works, the second $1 million usually takes about a third of the time the first one did. If the first $1 million took 20 years, the second might only take 6 or 7. The third might take 4. This is the concept of investment velocity. Your money starts to snowball so fast that the gains eventually dwarf your contributions. In the beginning, you are the engine. In the middle, you and the money are sharing the load. At the end, the money is a jet engine and you are just the pilot. This is why the rich seem to get richer so effortlessly. They aren't necessarily working harder than you. Their money is just further along the compounding curve. To make this less abstract, imagine you are building a house. For the first few years, you are out there in the mud, digging the foundation by hand. You are carrying every brick, mixing every bag of concrete, and hammering every nail. That is what saving your first 100,000 feels like. It is manual labor. But as you get more money, you start being able to hire help. You get a bulldozer, then a crew, then a project manager. By the time you have $1 million, you aren't even on the construction site anymore. You are sitting in an office looking at the blueprints while the house builds itself. The problem is that most people get tired of digging the foundation and give up before they ever see the walls go up. They see the guy with the finished house and think he got lucky, but they didn't see the years he spent in the mud when the progress was invisible. Now, here is the twist that most people don't talk about. Reaching $1 million isn't just about the math. It is about the unlearning you have to do. Most of us are raised with a scarcity mindset. We are taught to trade our time for money. We are taught that if we want more money, we have to work more hours. This works fine when you are starting out, but it is a trap that will keep you from ever hitting that $1 million mark if you don't break out of it. At a certain point, your time becomes less valuable than your capital. If you are spending 5 hours a week trying to save $20 on groceries, but your $1 million portfolio is moving by $10,000 a day based on market fluctuations, your priorities are upside down. Everything changes after $1 million because you have to learn how to stop being a worker and start being a curator of your wealth. You have to learn how to manage risk instead of just managing a budget. I have a friend, we'll call him Jason, who hit the $1 million mark a couple of years ago. Jason was the kind of guy who would drive 10 miles out of his way to save 5 cents on a gallon of gas. Even after his portfolio hit 7 figures, he was still clipping coupons and stressing over the price of eggs. He called me one day, sounding totally overwhelmed. He said, "Dylan, the market dropped 2% today, and I lost $20,000. That's more than I spent on my car. How am I supposed to handle this?" This is where things quietly go wrong for people. They hit the number, but they haven't updated their internal software. Jason was still living in the manual labor phase of his financial life. He was trying to control every penny while ignoring the fact that he was now navigating a ship in the middle of the ocean. He had to learn that at this level, your job isn't to prevent the waves. It's to make sure the ship stays upright. We worked on helping him see that a 2% drop isn't a loss unless he sells, and that his new job was staying calm while the engine did its work. This leads us to a crucial point about the hidden systems of taxes. In America, the way you are taxed changes dramatically once you move from earned income to investment income. When you work a job, the government takes their cut off the top of every paycheck. You pay Social Security, Medicare, and federal and state income taxes. But when you have $1 million invested, a huge chunk of your income comes from capital gains and qualified dividends. These are often taxed at a much lower rate than a standard paycheck. In some cases, if you manage it right, you can pull out tens of thousands of dollars a year and pay 0% in federal taxes. Think about that. The person working 40 hours a week at a retail job might be paying a higher percentage of their income in taxes than the person living off $1 million portfolio. It feels backwards, but it is the reality of the system we live in. Once you hit that million, you stop being a taxpayer in the traditional sense, and you start becoming a tax strategist. So what does that actually mean for you? Sitting at your kitchen table right now? If you aren't at $1 million yet, and most people aren't, does this mean you should just feel discouraged? Absolutely not. In fact, it should be the opposite. Understanding that the game changes so drastically at the finish line should give you the motivation to keep pushing through the mud right now. Every dollar you save today isn't just a dollar for a future cup of coffee. It is a tiny little worker that you are sending out to join your future army. If you know that the first 100,000 is the hardest, then you can forgive yourself for feeling like progress is slow. You can look at your modest gains and say, okay, the boulder is moving an inch. That's an inch closer to the downhill slope. Let's talk about a playbook for how to actually get to that tipping point. It isn't about picking the next hot crypto coin or gambling on penny stocks. The people I know who actually hit the $1 million mark and stayed there followed a very specific, almost boring sequence. First, they automated the fuel. They didn't rely on willpower to save money. They had it taken out of their paycheck before they ever saw it. If you never see the money, you don't miss it. Second, they ignored the noise. They didn't panic when the news told them the world was ending. They understood that the market is a machine that turns human progress into wealth. And as long as people are still waking up, going to work, and trying to solve problems, that machine is going to keep running. Third, they avoided lifestyle creep. This is the biggest killer of wealth. I've seen guys making $500,000 a year who are broke because they bought the boat, the country club membership, and the third car. To hit $1 million, you have to be willing to live like you have less than you do for a while, so that eventually, you can live however you want. Here's where this gets really powerful. Once you hit that $1 million mark, your risk budget changes. When you have nothing, you can't afford to take risks because one mistake sets you back to zero. But when you have $1 million, you can actually afford to be more adventurous. You can start that business you've always dreamed of. You can invest in a friend's startup. You can take a year off to travel or learn a new skill. The $1 million acts as a massive shock absorber for your life. It allows you to say no to things that don't serve you and yes, to opportunities that might have seemed too risky before. This is the part of the story where you stop being a victim of the economy and start being a participant in it. You aren't just reacting to interest rates or inflation anymore. You are positioned to benefit from the way the world moves. Remember that feeling of opening your bank app and feeling a pit in your stomach? This is the exact mechanism that deletes that feeling. It isn't just about the number of zeros. It is about the realization that you have solved the money problem. For most of human history, the struggle for survival was about finding food and shelter every single day. In our modern world, that struggle has been abstracted into a struggle for money. When you hit $1 million invested, you have essentially finished the main quest of the game. You have secured your survival and the survival of your family for the foreseeable future. Everything you do after that point is a side quest. It is about purpose, contribution, and legacy. That is a profound psychological shift that most people never get to experience, and it is the real reason why everything changes. But I want to be honest with you about the dark side of hitting this milestone too. There is a phenomenon called the one more year syndrome. I've seen it happen a dozen times. A guy hits his goal. Let's say it was $1 million, and instead of feeling free, he feels terrified. He thinks, what if there's a crash? What if inflation eats it all? Maybe I need $2 million. He stays at the job he hates for one more year, and then another, and another. He becomes a slave to the number instead of the master of it. The change that happens at $1 million only works if you have the mental maturity to trust the math. You have to realize that you've already won. If you hit the $1 million mark, but you're still acting like you're broke and stressed, you haven't actually gained anything. You've just accumulated a very expensive scoreboard. This is why I always tell people that the journey to $1 million is just as important as the destination. The discipline you learn, the patience you develop, and the understanding of how the world works are what actually make you wealthy. If you won $1 million in the lottery tomorrow, you wouldn't experience the everything changes shift we've been talking about. You would likely spend it all within a few years because you wouldn't have the internal software to manage it. You wouldn't understand the boulder, the tax strategies, or the investment velocity. But if you build that $1 million brick by brick, by the time you get there, you will be the kind of person who knows exactly what to do with it. You will be the person who can look at a market crash and see a sale instead of a disaster. You will be the person who understands that money is a tool, not a master. If this made a few things click for you, I'd suggest saving this video or taking a few notes. The road to 7 figures is long, and there are going to be days where you feel like you're digging that foundation in the rain and getting nowhere. In those moments, you need to remind yourself of the physics. You need to remind yourself that the boulder is getting heavier and the hill is getting steeper, and eventually, gravity is going to start working for you instead of against you. The system can feel like it is rigged against the little guy, and in many ways, it is. But the cheat code is understanding the rules of the game so well that you can play it to your advantage. You don't have to be a genius to hit $1 million. You just have to be more patient than the person next to you. Think about the next time you see a headline about the stock market or interest rates. Instead of worrying about how it affects your monthly budget, try to look at it through the lens of a $1 million mind. Ask yourself, how does this affect the engine? How does this change the velocity of my compounding? When you start thinking like an owner instead of a consumer, you are already halfway to the milestone. The math will eventually catch up to your mindset. It might take 5 years, 10 years, or 20, but the timeline matters less than the direction. Once you are on the right path, the destination is inevitable. Now, you see why that $1 million mark is so much more than just a vanity metric. It is the boundary between two different worlds. It is the line where your labor ends and your capital begins. It is the transition from running to stay in place to gliding toward the horizon. It is not an easy journey, but I can tell you from watching so many people make it, it is a journey worth taking. The freedom on the other side isn't just about what you can buy. It is about who you can be when you aren't afraid of your bills anymore. You become a better friend, a better parent, and a more engaged citizen when the constant background noise of financial stress is finally silenced. If you want to go deeper into how to actually build that first 100,000, the hardest part of the whole climb, the next thing you need to understand is how to optimize your savings rate without making your life miserable. That is exactly what I break down in my other sessions, and it is the bridge that gets you from the mud to the mountain. Don't let the big numbers intimidate you. Every mountain is just a collection of small stones. Your job is just to pick up the next stone and put it in the right place. The math will take care of the rest. I hope this gave you a little more clarity on why the struggle feels the way it does right now, and more importantly, what the payoff looks like if you stay the course. Money doesn't have to be a mystery, and it doesn't have to be a source of constant anxiety. It is just a system of incentives and math, and once you know the translation, you can make it work for you. You have the ability to change the trajectory of your life, one disciplined decision at a time. Keep your eyes on the boulder, keep pushing, and eventually, you'll be the one standing at the top of the hill watching it roll. I'm Dylan from Dylan Investments. Money talks, and I'll keep translating it for you. Have a good one, my friend.